How you doing, everyone? I'm Pete Fiutak, managing editor of Campus Insiders. Me and Russ Mitchell, SEC insider extraordinaire. We're going to be sitting here on the Google Hangout today for an hour talking about SEC and the world that it is. We'll be talking about all the games. You got any questions for us? Fire them over, and Russ and I'll talk about it all for a while here. Russ, start things off here before anything else. I was just off a radio show with WFNZ in Charlotte with those guys, and their big topic and the thing that everyone's talking about down there right now has been Jadeveon Clowney. And you've got the old school people who are ticked off at the idea of, is this guy going to like fake it the rest of the year and just get out and go to the NFL? And the newfangled guys are saying, yeah, okay, what's he doing playing college football anymore? He's hurt, he's banged up. Why is he risking his future by playing? So you have both sides of the argument here. You have everyone screaming at each other, everyone mad. I want the right people to think, should Jadeveon Clowney be playing any more college football?
Yeah, I mean, the issue really is not one about whether or not he should be playing college football. The issue is whether or not he's capable of playing college football right now, and if he's communicating effectively to his boss, to his coach. And I think what this boils down to me is it's not uncommon for players to not be healthy and to wait to the last minute to be able to play and then let their coaches know at the last minute. The question is, it seems to me in listening to how Spurrier's gone back and forth that there's been a lack of communication between Jadeveon and his coaches. And, that can cause a lot of problems for the morale of the program. So that's what I would be keeping.
How can there be a lack of communication between it's Jadeveon Clowney and you're Steve? If you're Steve Spurrier, don't you go to Jadeveon? It's not like it's a backup punter. Don't you go, hey Jadeveon, how you feeling today, dude? What lack of communication can there possibly be with these guys?
I think the other way of thinking about it is this. I've never had a coach ever say that talk about a player when they felt that player was hurt. They never talk about players when they feel that a player is hurt. Yep. And in this situation, he's talking about him, so that leads me to believe that Spurrier's questioning exactly how much he is hurt. So
it'd be interesting to hear what his real mindset is, and we're probably never going to know. But if it wasn't Jadeveon Clowney, if he's like a third-round draft pick, is he still out there playing? Is he fighting through this? Is he trying to improve his draft stock? I'm not saying the guy's faking or anything like that, but it's in the NFL, you're going to play hurt every single game. So, what I'm hearing from all the scouts, Russ Landy was on the other day, his stock isn't dropping or anything like that, and he should still be the top 5 pick, if not number 1 overall. GMs don't seem to care about any of this stuff. They just like the fact that he's big, fast, and really, really good. But at some point, you got to get out there and produce, and I think he's starting to see that, why am I producing at less than 100%? Now, for me, as the college football fan, South Carolina's still in the national title hunt. I know it doesn't seem like it. Still win the SEC championship. They can still, if everything breaks the right way and they run the table, that means they're going to have to beat Clemson along the way. That means they got a couple other nasty games coming up. I think they got a shot here. I think there's still something to play for. It's not like Marcus Lattimore last year where he's playing for the Outback Bowl. But as soon as South Carolina loses one more game, if you're Clowney, you are nuts to play one more down in college football, and you absolutely have to.
You and I have debated this for a long time, and in fact, you wrote the first time I read this, you wrote it. I'll give you a tiny bit of credit. Yeah, it was like 8 years ago.
The North Carolina paper didn't give me any credit for it, but that's all right.
8 years ago, when you said, if you're a first-round caliber player, you should not be playing. If you're a top 10 pick, you should not be playing. There's nobody in their right mind that can blame this kid or his family or anybody deeply involved with him if he says, you know what, I'm hurt. My rib is banged up, my ankle's banged up, and you know what? I've got $10 million waiting over here, and I love you, Old State U, but I'm going to go take the $10 million.
Exactly. Here's my argument to the other side with I'm getting yelled at by all the college football fans. Oh, what are you talking about? Commitment and sacrifice and all the other players. Yeah, that's all nice and good. But here's my thing. If you're allowed to argue about commitment, sacrifice for your team, if in the next minute you take out your checkbook and you write a check to Marcus Lattimore for a $9 million
10 large, baby.
Cost, by deciding to play one more down in college football. Now he's a 100,000-aire, he's not a millionaire because of this. So it's a nice, cute thing, but remember, it's a business for these guys. It's a game for us.
Yeah, and everybody talks about what a lot of people don't realize about the insurance policy that you sign up for.
It's only a couple grand.
A lot of people don't realize. like if you're a top player, like Teddy Bridgewater has a $10 million insurance policy, right? You can sign up for these insurance policies with organizations like the Lloyds of London that will protect you in the event that you get seriously injured. However, in all of those, there's a little caveat that says you can never play football again. And most of these guys are going to want to play again.
I think you're right. I think it's $10 million, but it's not $100 million. It's not that second contract, especially if you're a guy like Bridgewater or a guy like Clowney, where in the new world of the NFL, where the Sam Bradford contract is the last of the really big first rounders. The first contracts are nice. You don't get that big mega money until the second deal.
Right.
And now, more than anything else, these NFL GMs, they don't want these guys coming in hurt. Now with the concussion protocols that are happening, if you get guys that are banged up a little bit and you get that, I got a concussion tag, you're 1 or 2 years away from being out of the league at that point.
Talking about concussions, I'm interrupting you here, Pete. Becca has a question, and Becca would like to know what she can do to get Steve Spurrier back to Florida.
Why do you want him? What's wrong with Will Muschamp? Look, Steve Spurrier. Russ, I promise I will let you have your say after this. I will talk. Steve Spurrier is probably had the most overrated tenure ever for a college football head coach. Let me tell you why. He went with all that talent. He dominated the SEC. They owned the SEC. They won 1 national title, and why? Because they backed into it because Ohio State came back to beat Arizona State. If you don't have that late play from Joe Germain to David Boston in the Rose Bowl, Arizona State's a national champion. Spurrier's still looking for his first national championship. They gagged year after year after year when he had the best teams in the country. I love Steve Spurrier. I think he's great. I'm a huge fan of the ball coach, but I know you think otherwise. Will Muschamp, he is more than fine.
Good Lord. Well, first of all, you're wrong again. Steve Spurrier might go down in history as one of the greatest coaches of all time in college football. He should. He revolutionized the game. He was at a period of time in the SEC unbeatable. I mean, you think about Alabama right now, and you say Alabama's unbeatable. Alabama's actually lost a game in each of the last few years that they've had a chance to. I mean, Alabama hasn't had a loss-free season in 4 or 5 years, right? So I mean,
did they go loss-free 3 years ago?
They lost 3 the year that they had to play 6 teams coming off a bye week.
Yeah.
That was 3 years ago. They went 3-3 against those teams that they had to play coming off a bye week.
Right?
But I will say this, Becca, I kind of agree with Pete a little bit here. Will Muschamp is a great coach. Give him time to bring the pro-style players that he wants in his program to be running his offense. The fact that Tyler Murphy is quarterbacking for them right now, that's not a good thing.
All right.
It's a good segue, by the way. He wants a pro-style offense and a pro-style quarterback, and he doesn't have that.
But he doesn't need, because this is effective, and here's the fundamental disagreement here. I know you love your flash, you love your shiny things, you love your cheerleaders in the background, you need your big flash and dash with your offense. I am more than fine with a Florida offense that grounds and pounds it. Special teams, defense. I'm okay with Jeff Driscoll types as long as they're not throwing the ball to other Miami Hurricanes. And they were fine. This Florida thing worked last year. 1 loss, got to a BCS game, came this close from playing for a national title. I think this system can work, especially when you get the athletes and the talent like you get in the SEC. And people get all mad at the idea what Florida's doing now. What LSU did before they figured out their passing game is basically they ran an old school Big Ten offense and style of play with talent, and it worked. And it was great, and it was fine. And I think Tyler Murphy is fine. The biggest problem with Florida, they've got Florida's schedule. They don't have Alabama's schedule the rest of the way.
Well, I mean, perhaps this is a good segue into one of the big games this weekend, which is Florida traveling on the road to play LSU. Pete, when you think about that game, you think about an LSU defense that historically, or at least lately, has been exceptionally dominant. They're not that dominant this year. They've had a lot of turnover. What do you think about that heading into this game?
Wait, the Florida. I'm sorry. Which game?
Florida LSU. What do you think about the LSU defense? It's not been as dominant as it has been lately.
Yeah, well, part of that is you're playing guys like Aaron Murray. Part of that is that you're right. The defensive front seven hasn't really stepped up its play. It's not getting the quarterback. That's the difference. Why did they lose to Georgia? Aaron Murray got time. Zach Mettenberger didn't. There's your main difference, and the fact that it was on the road. But, with that offense, it's doing everything right. The running game's fantastic with Jeremy Hill. The receivers are NFL caliber. Zach Mettenberger, I think you could make a case is playing as well as any quarterback in the country. I would have any problem if he was the first quarterback taken in the draft. The offensive line's healthy. The defense has athletes. It's fine. But the thing about this Florida game is you got to be prepared for the slugfest. The key to this game for Florida is don't turn the ball over. Hang on to the ball as much as you can. Can LSU be patient? Can they handle when Florida's going on these long marches? They hang on to the ball for 10 minutes a quarter. Can they just not be so jumpy and Zach Mettenberger not try to force things? I love Florida in this game. I think LSU wins it, but, man, I think Florida's going to give them a nasty, nasty game.
Yeah, and I'm not expecting that at all. I think LSU wins by double digits. This is a Florida team that really has played nobody at this point. Nobody. Arkansas.
Good.
Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee. That's the 11th.
The back end though.
That's the three worst offenses in the SEC right now. You know what the fourth worst offense is in the SEC? Florida. And I mean, you can say whatever you want. Like Doug Chapman, our colleague, talks about the fact that Tyler Murphy makes this team more dynamic than Jeff Driscoll does. That's ridiculous. If he did, he would have been starting instead of Jeff Driscoll. They've both been on campus for the last 3-4 years, and yet it's Driscoll. And actually, Murphy was third string. He was behind Jacoby Brissett, who left to go play at North Carolina State. So this kid, Tyler Murphy, has never played in a stadium close. They call that stadium in LSU Death Valley for a reason. You don't get to put the word death on your stadium and leave it there unless it's an ugly place to play.
It'd be Clemson again. You got to take that down. There's one Death Valley at the moment there, Russ.
Tyler Murphy is not going to be able to hear. The offensive line's not going to be able to hear. As a result, it will struggle with the rushing offense. We saw that where? 2 weeks ago. LSU's offensive line struggled to get the rush going in between the hedges out in Georgia, right? Georgia had difficulty with its offensive line in Clemson, and Florida will have difficulty with its offensive line in Death Valley.
Yeah, but if you're talking about asking Tyler Murphy to be Johnny Manziel, he can't do that. This is a different animal, and this is where Florida's situation is great for a guy like Tyler Murphy. He doesn't have to be fantastic. If his stat line is, say, 9 of 17 for 150 yards, no interceptions, no turnovers, and Florida has the ball for 38 minutes, he'll have done his job. He doesn't have to be dynamic. He just has to let that pounding running game just pound, pound, pound. Again, we talked about the LSU defense. The biggest problem in this game is they're going to have a hard time getting off the field. I think you just line up, and by the third and fourth quarter, you know how swampy it is down there. I think the group gets tired. I think this is going to be a tight game. Again, I think LSU wins, but I think it's going to be really, really tight, and they're going to be in for a big battle.
Here's the one thing you need to know about LSU's defense, y'all. LSU's defense right now is ranked 7th in the SEC. 7th. But more importantly, if you factor for LSU's defense playing only against SEC teams, only against SEC on SEC violence, they drop to 10th. 10th best in the SEC. Well, that's not very good.
Play too. I mean, you talk about Arkansas and Kentucky having these bad offenses, which they sort of do. But when you play a Florida defense, all of a sudden your stats look really, really bad. It's like those teams that have the worst defense in the country because they played Baylor or played Oregon. Or, it just depends on who you play at the right time. And but you're right. I mean, this isn't the sexiest of Florida teams, and they're not going to win the East. The schedule is just way too nasty, but they're going to tag someone along the way. And I would not be – I mean, LSU – and this is the fun part about the SEC right now. The difference between, going to some, New Year's Day Florida Bowl and playing for the national championship is just paper thin. Georgia's still in the national title hunt. LSU is still in the national title hunt. Florida is still in the national title hunt. South Carolina, Alabama, all these teams – if they have to look at it and say, hey, if we win out, we are probably playing in the BCS championship game. So, we got all these teams that are in the mix right now. And Florida, if they win this game, all of a sudden we got to start talking about the Gators as possible.
Florida's not winning this game. Florida's not winning this game. Florida might go 6-6. Mark the tape. Florida might go 6-6. Okay, Pete.
Yes.
Wants to know if the SEC is if we should just slap a 12 on the end of SEC and call them the SEC 12 like the Pac-12 or the Big 12 based on how much offense there is.
I think I think I got this right. 36 SEC players were drafted in last year's draft. It doesn't include the guys.
Defense.
Yeah, defensive players. Thank you. Were drafted in the draft. It doesn't include the guys who are just done. It doesn't include the free agents. It doesn't include other parts of this puzzle. And you look at Georgia. You do not get better by losing Jarvis Jones, John Jenkins, Alec Ogletree, Bakari Rambo. Or look at LSU, Sam Montgomery, Eric Reed, Kevin Minter. You don't lose talent like that. And yes, all these programs gear it back up. They just replace NFL guys with more NFL guys, more 4- and 5-star talents. But that takes a little time. It takes a little transition for these defenses to kick in. Now, when you're playing, Zach Mettenberger, who's an NFL starting quarterback playing in college. You have Aaron Murray, who, all right, I don't really love that much, but he's an NFL quarterback, and he is, an elite of the elite college football quarterback. You have all this offensive talent. You have a Johnny Manziel. You have A.J. McCarron. You have a phase now where you actually have offenses in the SEC, and it's cyclical. Remember, a couple years ago, the big argument was, Alabama's got the #1 ranked defense, but they played nobody. I mean, every offense they played was ranked in like the hundreds. Now it's switched around a little bit, but I think you're going to see the stats change around again. Again, I think Florida LSU is going to be a little bit of a slugfest. I think whenever Florida plays anybody, it's going to be a battle. Whenever Alabama plays anybody but Texas A&M, it's going to be a little battle. But this is going to be cyclical. It'll come back around 2 years from now. We're going to be like, hey, where's the offense in the SEC?
Yeah, I mean, we got to remember of the 14 teams in the SEC right now, there's 7 quarterbacks who are seniors, and some cat named Johnny Football out in Texas. So I mean, you're talking about a lot of experienced quarterbacks, and if there's one thing consistent about college football, no matter where you play it, in the North, the East, the West, the South, it's that senior quarterbacks thrive and freshman quarterbacks learn in the arms of very happy 300-pound defensive linemen who are more than willing to teach them the hard way. The other thing, Pete, just to get to your point about things being cyclical, I've had the really great fortune, and so has Pete, to travel all over the country watching college football, and they play great college football everywhere. It's the SEC's turn right now to play the best, but that will eventually cycle out. But each region is different. Just like French's yellow mustard, yes, French's yellow mustard is different for the 4 different regions. It has a different taste to it, even though it's packaged the same. Football is different. And the important thing for you all to remember is that football in the South, points are good. It's good to win. Everybody wants to win. But people in the South just want more than that. They want to crush their opponent. And that requires stout defense. And it doesn't mean we can't all be friends. Afterwards, we can go eat some gumbo and drink some Kentucky bourbon. But you need to be able to humiliate your opponent. It's important in the South. It's a beautiful thing. It's not going away. And you need strong defenses to do that. So the South is not going to become a Pac-12.
To that point, Andy wants to know, is the Pac-12 better than the SEC? Well, here's the problem. Going back to your point about the SEC loves themselves some SEC. They don't like to go anywhere. And it's the big argument from all the teams in the North, all the Big Ten teams. And no, the Big Ten isn't better than the SEC. If you throw Ohio State in the SEC right now, it's probably the 5th or 6th best team. Of course, it's not better than the ACC teams in the North. But the big complaint that other conferences have about the SEC is, come to our house. Look at over the years. Find me the game that Florida has played outside of a warm weather city ever. They don't travel. You'll never see Florida go to Michigan. You'll never see Florida go to an Oregon like Tennessee just did. And that's kind of the problem with a lot of these SEC schools. If you look at the records, if you get teams in SEC houses, forget about it. You get some of these colder weather teams down in the South when it's like 85 degrees with 1,000%.
This is ridiculous. Ridiculous. Georgia just went to Colorado. LSU just went to Washington. Tennessee just went to Oregon. I mean, this is an argument is mildly overblown.
Well, yeah, you can't compare going to Colorado, but you're right. But going to Oregon. Did they go to Oregon, or did Oregon play the neutral site thing?
No, they went to Oregon, didn't they? Because before it was in Tennessee.
Tennessee went to Oregon this time around. That's Tennessee. They can't play dead at the immediate moment. But you're right. Go back to the question, though. Is the Pac-12 better than the SEC? No. No. I don't think so. I mean, my biggest problem with the Pac-12, I love the Pac-12 this year, is by far the second best conference in the country. I love Washington. Oregon's obviously fantastic. Stanford's obviously great. You look even UCLA's got all the talent in the world. They're going to be very good. I still like USC and think they're going to be okay. Arizona State's proven itself to be okay. Arizona's good. The league as a whole has gotten a lot better because the coaching has gotten a lot better. Now, here's the big problem. It's my Oregon issue. Everybody loves Oregon. Everyone loves this offense. You get them against the weak and the sad. They use their little Jedi mind thing on these teams, and they blow them out of the water. You get Oregon against an elite of the elite SEC defense,
right?
Time to prepare for it, and veterans who can tackle, and all of a sudden that running game stops. Now, it doesn't mean the offense is stopped, Cole. Darren Thomas went nuts against Auburn in the national championship game a few years ago, but you could see it. Every single year, there are 1 or 2 games where Oregon actually has to play a real run defense, whether it was Stanford last year, there was Boise State in the LeGarrette Blount, Byron Houck game a few years back, or it was LSU a few years ago, and then Auburn. The running game itself, that's the core of this offense, does not work when you get an elite defense that can hit. Now, they played Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl a few years back. A great defense, great tacklers, no athleticism. They played USC last year, and they have great athletes, couldn't tackle a lick. Then you get Stanford, who could tackle, could get around the ball. So yeah, these SEC defenses, they can stop this Oregon team. They can stop these offenses. Going back to the problems with the SEC defenses, I'll take the SEC over a Pac-12 pretty much on a neutral site any day.
Yeah, and the one thing to tag into that, which is why the playoff is so important for conferences other than the SEC, and I think, the SEC has been pushing and pushing for a playoff, and its fans have been pushing and begging for a playoff for over a decade now, maybe 2 decades. I will say that a playoff will help teams like Oregon because it means you won't have 5-6 weeks to prepare for those games. You won't, because you'll have to prepare for the first playoff team, and you'll only have 2 weeks to do that, and then maybe a week or 2 weeks to prepare. So that really cuts down the amount of time that an opposing team in a playoff structure will have to prepare. We won't have this 6-week ridiculous break that we have right now. Although, when we get to 8, it'll be a little better.
That's the official longest you've said the word playoff in the last week without mentioning the words Condoleezza and Rice.
Timeout. We'll get to Condi. We'll get to that fiasco at the end. We'll get to the Rice fiasco at the end. Let's talk a little Georgia. We've got a couple questions. Dog on Tap has a question. He wants to know whether other SEC teams could lose that many wideouts, lose that many wide receivers, and still win a tough game on the road the way they did last week and play as well as they're playing right now.
Well, the problem with that is that was Tennessee, and we don't know yet. That's kind of why I think this game this weekend is so intriguing. I don't think if you had a 100% healthy Georgia team with Gurley, with Marshall, with the receivers, with the safeties, with everything in place, I think Missouri gets wiped off the map by this Georgia team. But that's not the case right now. This is not the same Georgia team it was against LSU, that it was against South Carolina, that it was against Clemson. This is just a shadow of itself. And Missouri's got some talent. They might not play big boy football. They might not be able to line up and slam you around a little bit. But Georgia got through that game. And again, back to this radio appearance I was on, they were asking about Aaron Murray and the Heisman now. And I'm not the biggest Aaron Murray fan, but now as a Heisman voter, yeah, okay. After what he did to carry that team, with nothing going his way against Tennessee, that's a Heisman moment. That's probably the most impressive thing he's done in his career. Is he saved the national title season potentially by willing his team through that game. Now they got time to prepare. Now they get some of these young players a week of practice with Aaron Murray. Now maybe they can get on the same page a little bit. Because the problem against Tennessee is you could just tell the timing was not there between Murray and the receivers. But now Missouri is really, really good. So we're going to see if Georgia comes up and whacks Missouri this week. All right, then yeah, Georgia's probably really that good, but I don't know if it happens.
Actually, we could do a whole show just talking about Georgia football right now. There's been so much turnover with that program, and you look at both. We might get Gurley back, but how healthy will he be even if he does come back? This is what I would say. If this game were being played anywhere other than between the hedges, I think Missouri would have a good chance. And I know that College Football News and Campus Insiders predicted a Missouri win. I disagree vehemently with that prediction, Pete. But
don't forget Mizzou over there. I know different teams, different players, different years. This program is used to playing it. I know it's different. It's not between the hedges, but they've won games on the road in Big 10, Big 12 atmospheres.
Well, they played very well in the Swamp last year against a very good,
They had them beat.
a very good Florida rushing offense behind Mike Jealousy. And this is what I'll say. 2 weeks ago, when I was in Athens to watch Georgia play LSU, that offensive line, it was so quiet when Georgia had the ball. You could hear people talking on the other side of the stadium. That's how quiet it was when Georgia had the ball. And the offensive line was being so efficient, it was marvelous. And the thing that was interesting is before Gurley got hurt, he was averaging 9 yards a carry. When Marshall came in to spell him, he was averaging 9 yards a carry.
Yep.
So it was almost as if and Marshall's average went down a little because he had to run he got some carries inside the 10-yard line, so he couldn't have as many yards. But, I think they ended up averaging over 7.5 yards per carry in that first half. And they were able to plug in whoever they wanted, it seemed, in to run because the holes were huge. That was against, we've pointed out, not the best LSU defense, but still an LSU defense that I would put up man-on-man against Missouri. If they can do that again in the first half, they'll blow Missouri out by the halftime.
J.J. Green, do I have the name right? Is that our new guy, our new Georgia running back who's going to have to be ripping it up with Gurley?
The freshman.
The freshman who's the speedster. Well, here's the other thing, too. We talked about this before about the veteran quarterbacks. James Franklin is healthy, and that was really the key last year. He was never right. From the start of the season, he was never quite healthy. There were the concerns about his toughness, whether or not he could handle
the offensive line.
As he's worth, and now he's great, and he has basically an NBA front line of receivers to throw to. Dorial Green-Beckham goes 6'6". Damian Washington, I think, is like 6'5". They have they have like 6'6" and 6'5" receivers all over the place. And how do you match up? The problem is the Georgia safeties are banged up too. We're talking all about the offense. We're talking about the wide receivers. I think the bigger concern is how do they handle this passing game? Franklin spreads the ball around really well, and he's mobile. Remember, before there was a Johnny football, kind of the argument about can the Big 12 teams live in the SEC, it was Missouri that people were talking about and saying, look, this little tippy-tappy offense thing, okay, they can't line up and blast away with anybody, but that was the offense that people thought, okay, maybe this gives the SEC problems. And
hey, Pete,
Texas A&M.
You talk about their wide receivers all the time because I know you have a love affair with them. But at the end of the day, what's driven this Missouri team this year is their running game. They got their running back. They got Hansborough might be even better.
Yeah,
they're the best. They're the best rushing team in the SEC right now. They've gone from worst to first. They're averaging almost 6.1 yards per carry. And, I know they've played nobody. I know Missouri hasn't played a top 25 team yet. And that gives you a little bit of pause if you're a Missouri fan. I mean, Georgia's played 3 teams in the top 10, and Missouri hasn't played anybody in the top 25. However, what Missouri did do was they went on a road and played a good Indiana team and crushed them. That Indiana team beat Penn State last week for the first time in the school's history. So that was a good win on the road in Bloomington. They went to Vanderbilt and beat soundly a good, not great, but a good Vandy team. I think this game will be close. And if it was anywhere between the hedges, I'd give Missouri a little bit more of an edge, but they're not beating the dogs.
You're absolutely right. It's absolutely not like beating Indiana at Indiana is not like beating South Carolina or LSU or anything like that, but they overcame a little adversity in that game too. Remember, they turned the ball, I think they turned the ball over 3 times in the first half, and they still were able to come out and shine after that thing. So I'm picking Missouri win only because I think Georgia's too banged up.
Hey, Mandy wants to know if Georgia can win out.
I was looking at the schedule here. I was looking this up. You know what? And that's the kind of thing. If they get by Missouri,
it's a clean run.
How healthy are they, though? I mean, Vanderbilt, yes. I still think. I know we're back to this again. If they're banged up, they're not beating Florida. If this team this week is still as banged up in a couple weeks for that cocktail party, they're not beating Florida. Appalachian State, please. At Auburn, all of a sudden, Auburn.
I know.
They maybe not, but they looked all right. They looked all right last week against Ole Miss. That might be kind of an X factor game. They're not losing to Kentucky and they're not losing to Georgia Tech. So, but I've been predicting them all year, even after the Clemson loss, that they're going to play the national title. But again, I think they're going to lose this game only because they're hurt. If they were 100% healthy, I'd like them a whole bunch better.
All right, let's go ahead and shift gears and move on to another game, which is Ole Miss. Ole Miss got beat up on the road against Alabama, got beat up again on the Plains against the Auburn Tigers, the resurgent Auburn Tigers. Now they're home to take on Johnny Football and the Texas A&M Aggies. You're looking at that game. What do you think?
Here's the problem. Mr. Nick Marshall, you see what that kid did against Ole Miss last week? I believe I might have this right. He went over 100 yards rushing, 117 yards. Had a very effective day. Didn't really bomb away passing the ball, but he was very efficient. Kept the chains moving, got the job done. Gosh, if Texas A&M only had a quarterback who could throw effectively and run pretty well, that's scary. If you're Ole Miss and you've got the Uber version of Nick Marshall coming your way, I think this is where Johnny Manziel, who's been off the grid for the last couple of weeks, I kind of miss Johnny Lohan a little bit. We need some more talk about him.
But did you just call him Johnny Lohan?
I did. He's going to get back in the Heisman. This is his game where he rips. I think he rips it up. I think he destroys Ole Miss. Now, but did Ole Miss lose to Alabama twice? They got all cocky. They got all, we can play with Alabama. And Alabama was like, no, here's your shutout. And the week after, it almost looked like they didn't quite have their mojo back. Well, now they get Texas A&M. They got to gear this up for a shootout.
You know, Nick Marshall only threw for 93 yards in that win against Ole Miss for Auburn. 93. Auburn had 375 total yards, but, only 93 passing yards. You can pretty much expect that Johnny Manziel will quadruple that.
He might have done the first pass to Mike Evans.
The other thing you need to know about the Aggies right now is that they are converting a nation's best on third down efficiency. A nation's best. Now, remember, last year they were good, too. Last year they finished the season at 55%. Right now they're converting at 57% on third downs, which is ahead of the 49% they were at this point last year. This is an A&M offense. Remember, A&M has to travel to Ole Miss twice. They were in Ole Miss last year. They're in Ole Miss again this year because of the way Ole Miss is trying to balance its schedule with the new teams in. But A&M surrendered the ball 6 times. They had 4 fumbles and 2 interceptions last year. You can't really count on that. If you're an Ole Miss fan, you can't really say, well, we're going to get 6 turnovers again, which should keep us in the game. You can't expect that.
And here's your problem. How did they lose that game to Auburn last week? 2 words, Bo Wallace. Welcome back. I missed the old Bo Wallace where he kind of throws the really bad interception at the wrong time and got pick-sixed up last week, and he can't do that this week. He can't force plays. Bo Wallace has got to get time. And the good part for Ole Miss, this is not the Texas A&M defense of the last few years where Millers and Sean Porters and DeMontre Moores that would just have guys flying into the backfield and they would come up with 1 million sacks. They don't have that this year. I could be wrong on this. I think they're last in the SEC in sacks. They're not generating any pressure whatsoever, and their secondary is paying the price. So Bo Wallace, they can't freak out when Johnny Manziel and Texas A&M are hitting these home runs. They got to be patient. That's just not what this type of young team does very well.
No, this is a Texas A&M defense that ranks dead last against the run, close to dead last against the pass. They are dead last in total defense in the conference, which is last when you factor it. And now they're traveling on the road. But again, given what we've seen, the big thing that Bo Wallace said this week was he said, or I think either this week or previously, that his wide receivers are better than Johnny Manziel's wide receivers. Care to comment on that, Mr. Fiutak?
Maybe if considering that Ricky Seals-Jones is banged up, Mike Evans is certainly fantastic, but I'll kind of buy that. His targets are really strong. I love Dante Moncrief. Quan Treadwell's obviously becoming a star. They might have, and with what Jeff Scott's doing, you could make the case that outside of quarterback, that Ole Miss, at the very least, holds serve skill position-wise. It might even be better and more explosive in a lot of ways. But they don't have number 2 under center, and that's kind of going to be their problem.
No, and playing at home, you left out Logan too. Logan's doing a good job catching the ball as well. So it is a very complete unit. I'd take Mike Davis over all 3 of them combined. I think that sophomore is that explosive and will run amok. He will run amok down there in Oxford this weekend.
All right, so who's winning this thing?
Oh, I think A&M wins. I think the spread is 6. I would put A&M over 8 or 9. You're not going to – the reason why – and I like Ole Miss – and the thing to remember is Ole Miss is finally at home, right?
Yeah.
Ole Miss has been on the road forever. Texas, Alabama, Auburn, they're finally home. I think that will be a huge motivation for these guys sleeping in their own bed, being able to go there. But this is a very efficient A&M offense. They're not going to have 6 turnovers. They're playing very, very well right now, and I don't see I see this as the third in what will be 4 straight losses for Ole Miss because LSU comes into town next week.
Yeah, I was going to check out what the Ole Miss schedule. They're getting to the end of this brutal schedule. But whatever it is, take the over. I don't know if the over is like 155 in this game. These teams are just going to be bombing away from each other. This probably will be the most fun game of the weekend because these two teams are just going to go absolutely crazy on each other.
Agreed. I never wager on children, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any, that's that's never a good thing to put money on children. But that being said, I would say that this is a good bet that you're going to see a lot of.
Here's where things get weird for Ole Miss, and that you kind of looked at the preseason schedule. You're like, if you can just get through the first half, just somehow just not get obliterated through the first half of the season. And because they went on the road for 4 of the first 5 games, and you're like, there's no way they're beating Texas. They got by Texas. That's a freebie right there. And you're saying there's no way they get by Alabama, and they didn't. And Auburn was kind of that 50-50 game. They lost that one, but they're still alive. 3-2. But you're right. Texas A&M at home. They got to at least split between Texas A&M and LSU, and now they don't leave the state of Mississippi the rest of the season. They're going to beat Idaho, obviously. Arkansas is probably not going to be a problem, even though I think they're getting better. Troy is not going to be an issue. I love Missouri. I'm not just giving that game to Ole Miss quite yet, but that when you're at home, you got to win that game in the SEC, and then at Mississippi State. So if they could just split, they're not going to win the SEC West. They're going to go to some mid-range bowl at the end of the day. But if they can split between Texas A&M and LSU, they can have a nice end of the season and be one of the it teams going into next year.
Before we go to South Carolina, Arkansas, really quickly, let's touch on Alabama traveling up to Commonwealth Stadium to play the University of Kentucky Wildcats. Thoughts?
I think I think Kentucky won. I believe it was. I'm going to say it's 2007. I might be off by a few years or so. And I think before that, the last win was something like 1970. And then before that, I think you're talking in the 50s or something. There are some beatdowns in series over the years, but Alabama and Kentucky just seem to Alabama just owns Kentucky over the years.
They have good
the worst.
They have good bourbon in Kentucky, and I've been trying to encourage all of my Alabama friends to go up there and sample some of that Kentucky bourbon. Keeneland, you can go watch some beautiful horses and fast women before the game. I think it's a night game. I will say this about Kentucky, which is interesting that everyone should be aware of. You've got they're ranked 13th. Brace yourselves. Brace yourselves, Wildcats. They're ranked 13th in run offense, 13 in run defense, 13 in pass offense, 13 in run offense, 13 in run defense, and if you factor by passing attempt, they're dead last in pass defense. So, but I would say this, which is interesting. I've got faith, Pete, in Mark Stoops. I think he's doing a good job. He's recruiting well. And actually, if you look at their games, think about their games. They were not blown out against Louisville. They hung in there against Florida late. They came back. They came back against South Carolina on the road. So, even though their statistics are not very good, they're in games. They're not getting blown out like they were last year at the end of Joker's time.
Hey, Russ, you want to know who's recruiting well in the SEC? Everybody. Everybody recruits well in the SEC. That's the problem. Kentucky can recruit great, and it's not going to matter a lick. They'll never have that talent there. But you're right. Part of the key to this year has been that, they've hung around well. They hung around and played really well with South Carolina. They probably ruined Louisville's national title hopes. When the people start arguing about Louisville at the end of the year, everyone's going to go back. I'm going to keep going back and saying, hey, look, great job, Louisville, but you beat the worst team in the SEC by 13. That's your big SEC win.
Here's a big question for you. Here's a big question for you. Ready? Let's kind of split. We'll go half in the SEC and half out. Who has a better – oh, and by the way, Can we talk about Louisville playing Rutgers this weekend? I mean, let's not hype that game. Rutgers has the worst pass defense in the country, 118 out of 125 going up against Teddy Bridgewater. That game's going to be over like this.
Right now. Who has
like this?
Who has the more upside in the next 5 years, Kentucky or Louisville? At football?
At football, Kentucky. Kentucky. I mean, how could you say Louisville? Louisville right now is ranked in the top 10. I think Kentucky. I disagree with you, Pete. I disagree with you, shocker, and you know I'm usually right when it comes to the SEC, brother. I think Kentucky's got kids that they haven't been able to get before. They've gone across the border and taken away at least one kid that Ohio State wanted.
Okay.
Three top players from the state of Ohio.
Ooh.
It's Kentucky, baby. Take baby steps. Baby steps.
It's the Ole Miss recruiting argument, where Ole Miss had the greatest recruiting class in the history of mankind for them. They got Kimdichie, they got Tunsil, they got all the Treadwell.
Yeah, but they're all freshmen. They're all freshmen.
They got all these great players. They got this massive recruiting class. Last February, it's all anybody was talking about. It was like, look at what Ole Miss did, and they still had like the 5th best class in the SEC. Georgia's like, whatever, that's a day in the office for us. Alabama had probably the best class in the country. LSU had another great class. You know, kicking 1 or 2 guys from Ohio, that just doesn't get done. Kentucky's got to find something that can do really well at a high level, and the example is in Indiana, and that's what Stoops is trying to do. Indiana, for good or for bad, because they can't get the talent there, they're running the, let's find a way to get 1,000 plays a game offense, where it's great if you can get someone on their heels and blow them out of the water like they did against Penn State. Didn't work against Missouri when, if you go 3 and out, it takes 30 seconds and your D's back on the field. But you got an offense that works and you've got something that you can fall back on. I think that's what Kentucky's going to try to do. They're not going to go hell mummy necessarily, but they've got to have one of those teams with one of those offenses, which on the right day, if you're a Florida or a Georgia or a South Carolina, you kind of be like, okay, if we're not bringing our A game today, we're going to get tagged by this up-tempo attack.
All right, no more Kentucky or people are going to fall asleep on us. But, hey, real quickly, you got to give Ole Miss at least 12 months to get those freshmen into school before we start saying, anything about that class. I think the freshmen are playing very well for Ole Miss.
But I just think that's another day at the recruiting office for everyone else in the SEC.
But not for Ole Miss and not for Kentucky. They usually aren't at that level. Look at Vandy recruiting well. The only team right now that's not recruiting well in the SEC is Missouri.
Yeah, great. I got a Music City Bowl with your name on it then. Great. That's just super.
South Carolina, how can Arkansas win this game, says Bob.
You know what? South Carolina's just not putting together. South Carolina's got to be South Carolina. They have not put together a full 60 minutes in the last 3 weeks.
Agreed.
They decided to give up against Kentucky. Vanderbilt. They almost got tagged 3 weeks ago. UCF, they didn't show up for in the first half. They had to make the big comeback in the second half. And last week, they kind of decided to leave the stadium early against Kentucky. This is just a flaky team. And, the crazy part about it is, we keep talking about this, is they're still in the hunt for things. All the Jadeveon Clowney things and all these, the big loss to Georgia. With Georgia hurting, if Georgia starts losing, South Carolina's right there in the mix.
They have Florida at home. They get Florida at home this year.
Look at these next 3. They got to go on the road for 3 straight games. Arkansas, Tennessee, and Missouri. I'm going to keep harping on Missouri. That's going to be a problem. I'm not buying into Tennessee. Last week was kind of, I think, a fluke. That's their one. And then to close out over the last month, look at their November. Mississippi State at home. Florida. Coastal Carolina, and then the Clemson game, which is, if they're in the national title hunt, that one actually is going to matter. But the rest of this SEC schedule, that's not that bad. There's no Alabama on there. There's no LSU on there. They can do this, but they've got to get their heads right. They just, for whatever reason, this team cannot put together a full 60 minutes, and at some point they're going to get tagged by somebody. The thing about Brett Bielema, they talk about not being there yet. His team is starting to run well. They're starting to get more physical. The defense is starting to get there. He doesn't have the guys he wants to create his team, but this dude doesn't back down from anyone. He was never afraid of the Jim Trussels of the world, the big boys. He never had a problem with any teams. He always laughed whenever he went. Wisconsin always did kind of well in bowl games against SEC teams. They held their own more often than not. They beat a very good Miami team this year. But Bielema's team is not going to be intimidated. Ooh, we're playing South Carolina. They're not going to care about that.
This is what you need to know about Arkansas, which I think is taking a lot of people by surprise if you're thinking about Arkansas from last year. Do you realize that Arkansas right now is the 4th best team in the SEC against the run? They're the 6th best team in the SEC against the pass.
Yep.
So this was a team that was horrific last year under John L. playing on defense, just horrific. 14th in almost every defensive statistic you could think of, except for the good ones like tackles for loss and sacks. This was a defense last year that struggled mightily. Right now, they're not playing too bad. When you factor just against SEC opponents, SEC competition, it drops a little, but even as it drops, it's still in the middle compared to, again, to a defense that was at the bottom last year. You've already pointed out the fact that South Carolina has not been able to play a full game all season long. They've allowed teams back in. Now they're playing on the road. Do you have faith in South Carolina with a banged-up Jadeveon Clowney if he can't play? Do you have faith in a banged-up Connor Shaw? Do you have faith in them being able to play 60 minutes on the road against
Arkansas doesn't throw well, and the more impressive part about this defense for the Hogs so far is those stats include a total and complete gag against Rutgers, and includes playing against Johnny Football in a pretty fun shootout. But the problem for Arkansas is they just don't complete passes. I think Brandon Allen's, I think it's like a 48% clip. I think
13 in the SEC. 13.
Yeah, as a team, I think they're either, if they're right at 50% or lower, they're just not an efficient enough team. And if you're South Carolina, you say, okay, we're training everybody on stopping that running game. We're stopping Williams. We're stopping Alex Collins. We're stopping these guys from pounding away. And we just, hope make Brandon Allen beat us through the air. But again, South Carolina's guy show. My guy, we haven't mentioned him yet. We talk about all the other SEC quarterbacks. Everyone loves Manziel. Everyone loves Mettenberger and Murray, and I love James Franklin, and we're talking Bo Wallace. Connor Shaw might be as an effective SEC quarterback as there is. There's nothing pretty about his game. He's just kind of a baller. He's not really a Steve Spurrier type of quarterback where he's just going to sit back there and hit the post patterns over and over again. He just kind of makes plays. Got knocked out against UCF with a shoulder injury. Was supposed to be out 3 weeks. Came back last week and performed. He's one of those guys who I think has a will to win thing happening for him.
Hey, Pete, this is why South Carolina is going to win this game, and you touched upon it. Connor Shaw, 7 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Hasn't had a single interception yet on the season. He's 4th in the SEC in quarterback rating. He's not up there in the numbers, but he's very, very efficient. And if you add that with Mike Davis, who's leading the conference in rushing, Mike Davis is, for many, the surprise of the season right now. He'd be the one player I would pick if I could start right now today.
No, you wouldn't.
If right now today.
The sentence. Yeah, I don't know where this is going, but I'm just going to say no, you wouldn't.
I would take Mike Davis over Jeremy Hill and T.J. Yeldon.
No, you wouldn't.
Yes, I would. Absolutely.
Okay, you take
absolutely,
Mike Davis.
I would.
But you take Mike Davis. I will take Jeremy Hill or T.J. Yeldon, and I will win.
No, you won't. Right now, Mike Davis has better statistics on almost every single category.
I know, but yeah.
I'm telling you, this is the underappreciation of Mike Davis going on right now. Mike Davis is the best running back right now in the SEC. Okay, we got to change the subject. You ready?
Okay.
Condi Rice.
Oh. I will give you the floor, and then I will try to clean up the collateral damage from this.
Come close. I'll whisper to you.
No.
This isn't very tough. Nobody should have a seat on a playoff committee unless they have dedicated a portion of their life, their career, to college football, either directly in the form of participation or the administration thereof, or in the analysis of college football. If this has nothing to do with race, it has nothing to do with gender, you can stack that committee full of women. I don't think either Pete or I would care. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It has to do with one thing and one thing only: experience. Condi Rice is not experienced enough to be able to sit on that position. We're not talking about a board that's going to, determine ethical issues or determine how best to promote the sport or how best to do anything like that. We're talking about a committee of people that's supposed to be able to determine the relative worth of 125 different rosters across the entire country, all with their own different geographical weights and historical weights, and there's no way Condi Rice is in a position to be able to do that right now. And it is a crime that this has happened. And by the way, it happened for one reason, Pete: money. You know why? Because there's a lot of very powerful stakeholders in this process that never wanted a playoff in the first place, that were drugged into this playoff thing. Guys like Jim Delaney of the Big 12, who actually came out and said in front of Congress that he recognized that the playoff would make more money for all the stakeholders, but that it would create less separation, less divide between the Big Ten and the other conferences. So I'm not done. So he wanted that to not happen. He wanted less money so that he could keep a greater advantage. Those guys aren't dead. They're still around, and they're doing everything they can to marginalize this playoff process and slow down its development. And that's why we're seeing ridiculous things like Condoleezza Rice being nominated to sit on a playoff committee that's supposed to evaluate the relative worth of football teams.
My biggest problem isn't necessarily Condi Rice. It is Condi Rice Stanford fan.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that, but go ahead.
It's my issue with this is the idea of not just Condi. It's Barry Alvarez at Wisconsin. It's the idea of that everybody has to be, quote, represented. Because what the problem then it becomes, what happens if it comes down between Stanford and, let's say, a second SEC team for that number 4 spot?
Doesn't she just recuse herself?
I don't think you do that. Then why be a part of this? You can't recuse you've got to be able to vote. And the whole point of this is, you've got to be above reproach. You've got to be above this question. And it's, again, if Barry Alvarez votes for a Big Ten team over an SEC team, you're going to have screaming and yelling. And if he doesn't do that, you'll get the flip side and say, hey, look, you're just trying to do it. It creates, the system itself creates a problem. And the difference being that everyone kind of goes, well, you've got these different factions for the NCAA Men's Basketball Committee. Yeah, but if you miss out on getting the 8th best ACC team that was on the bubble, it doesn't matter. You miss on the 5th best team. Like right now, just throw out names right now. Let's say there's going to be losses, things are going to happen. Just imagine if you have an SEC champion. You have whoever the Pac-12 champion is. You have, let's say Louisville goes 12-0. Let's say Ohio State goes undefeated. What happens if Oklahoma goes undefeated? What about that second SEC team? What about that second Pac-12 team? There, right now, you could probably throw 6, 7, maybe 10 teams.
A much harder choice.
And so the problem then becomes, how should this have worked? And the best idea I've heard, within the realm of the real, came from Gary Danielson, was like, okay, let's just take this out of the hands of the committee. The committee should vote on which are the 4 best conferences this year and say, let's take the 4 top champions for the 4 champions from those 4 top conferences.
Yeah.
To me, this shouldn't even go to committee. The easiest way to do this would be make an 8-team playoff. The 6 BCS conference teams champions are automatically in, so you can play your way in, and then you have 2 wild cards.
2 at large, right?
And then the committee doesn't matter. And for some reason, and I don't know why, I do know why, because they want the hype and they want to make it a reality show, but they're judging this too much.
Yeah, listen, college football is always going to have controversy. There's always going to be controversy. You don't need to manufacture it, right? And by putting somebody in this position, and again, how Condoleezza Rice allowed herself to get put into a situation where she was going to have nimrods like me and be right, point out the fact that she's grossly underqualified for this position. No matter what she does, no matter what she picks, no matter what happens, there'll be a flip side of that that's going to rip this system apart. And I think there are people that would like to create an environment that rips this system apart. I want to touch upon one last thing. I can't do Condi Rice's job. You don't want me doing Condi Rice's job, all right? Condi Rice can't do my job. You put me in a room with Condi Rice, I would embarrass her on college football.
I need him on that wall.
Listen, because at the end of the day, do I think if Condi Rice devoted her life to this, do I think that she could do it better than me? Yes, I do. But you know what? And to be very clear, I'm not qualified for this committee. And I'm a guy who spends all day digging into Kentucky football statistics. And I'm not qualified to sit on this committee. You, Pete, are qualified to sit on this committee.
Here's my standard. I think everyone on this committee right now, out of the blue, almost like it's a horrible analogy for this, but almost like just an out of the blue blind, drug test almost. You give them a sheet with the top 25 teams ranked and say, name me the starting quarterback for all top 25 teams right now. I guarantee you, it's not just right. I guarantee you that nobody on that list can name
Agreed.
all top 25 starting quarterbacks. And that's the problem, because it's not about picking, I think. My other problem with this, how this is going to work, is it's not about what you believe. It's got to be about what you can prove.
What you can see, right?
It can't be like, I think Ohio State is really good, or I think this thing. No, you have to be able to dive into this, and almost to the point where you have to bow to the computers and strength the schedule somewhat and say, okay, look, this is the team that deserves to be. Like, look, did I think Notre Dame was the best team in the country? Not even close. But if you look at their resume last year and say, okay, look, they won at Oklahoma, they beat USC, they beat something like 9 bowl-bound teams. They earned it on the field by going undefeated against a good schedule. So yeah, they're in. I don't buy them. I don't think they're as good as a Texas A&M or LSU, but okay, they deserve to be in. And so as long as you take the belief factor out of this as much as possible, and I want transparency, and I don't want it at the very end. Yes. Throughout the season, I want to know, like, at the mid-season, what are you thinking? Like, right now, where are you going with all this stuff?
Okay, Pete, I got to wrap you up, brother. We're running out of clock. We're running out of time.
Yeah,
okay.
Do what you want.
You ready? Last thoughts, final thoughts. You got 60 seconds. 60 seconds, go.
Missouri is going to be the thing we're talking about next week at this time. I think that all across the college football landscape, the big stories that are going to rise up quickly are going to be Baylor. I think Baylor is going to be that story that start to say, hey, wow, look at them compared side by side with Oregon. Why are we loving Oregon and not giving the same love to Baylor? I think Texas Tech is going to rise up and quickly be a story. They're still undefeated. And I think Missouri, after they beat Georgia this weekend, next week the conversation is going to be, can Missouri actually win the SEC East? If you don't believe in Florida and you think South Carolina is kind of flaky and South Carolina's coming to Columbia, then you look at this schedule and you say, you know what? Maybe Missouri's got a shot, but they got to beat Georgia first.
All right. First of all, it's a damn good thing you have me to help you with the SEC, brother. That's all I got to say. All right, here's my closing thought. You ready? I think Nick Saban would make a good 5-star general. I think that he has the. I think he's an excellent strategist. He's excellent with strategy. He's good at leadership. He leads very well. He's good at motivation and discipline. And personally, it's just my personal opinion, but I think Nick Saban could send men to die. I think that he do that already. I think he has that personal makeup. But that doesn't mean that I'm sending Nick Saban to Afghanistan tomorrow, because Nick Saban is not a 5-star combat general. That's not the direction he chose to go in his life. He chose to become a fantastic college football coach. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with saying that Nick Saban could not be a 5-star general. I've got news for you. If you're over the age of 40 and you're not getting a paycheck from NASA right now, you're not going to be an astronaut, and I'll get you a tissue. There's nothing wrong with saying that Condoleezza Rice is not fit to serve on a committee that's responsible for judging the relative worth of 125 different college football teams, of which she has no business judging.
Russ, you ready to you want to start dogging the retired general that's going to be on this committee too?
By the way, I said that earlier. I said just wait for Petraeus. Just wait for Petraeus. You know it's going to be Petraeus.
No, the guy, I can't remember his name, but I think there is a retired general who's on this committee. Basically representing the Mountain West. So if you want to start dealing with the you don't support the troops by dogging a general being on this committee, I'll let you handle that one.
All right, how are we supposed to close this thing out?
Bye.
Bye.